Okay, so the situation has been improving thanks to the weather, but fire crews remain cautious about another potential flare-up. Joining us now to discuss the risks is Jason Thistlewaite. He is a professor at the University of Waterloo. Jason, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
I'm happy to be here.
So we heard that our reporter there, Karen, talking about in her story the possibility that there is fire smoldering underground here. Just how much of a risk is that for the community of Jasper? How vulnerable is it to reigniting, or to, this hotter temperature that's on the way, to, being more vulnerable to another fire?
This is one of the reasons why people might not be getting back into their homes as quick as possible, just because of the intensity of the heat and the fire. It's going to take some time to ensure that it's completely out. And, reports are saying there are still some active fires on the east side of town. But with the resources that are now in place and all the resources that flew in last week, I'm optimistic that they can get things under control.
Yeah, we also heard about them putting in some major sprinkler systems there. That has also been something that the town has been doing in preparation for an event like this over years, as well as doing some prescribed burns. And it's something that we heard the mayor in particular talking about today, saying that this isn't a failure, the fact that part of the town, a third of the town, was burned to the ground, but rather the success of some of those prevention efforts that they have been working on for decades, for more than 20 years. I wonder what you make of that sort of characterization of it, of this being a success.
The mayor's right, and his perspective is very much backed up by the reams of research out there on wildfire management. This was a beast of a fire, and the fact that they managed to contain it to 30% of the town rather than more is a real testament to the work that Jasper has been doing. Jasper has been on the forefront of wildfire management. It was an early adopter of the Fire Smart program, which is an organization that identifies a range of practices that you can do across the community and across your homes to be able to mitigate risk. They have a lot of forest management. So this is things like making sure there isn't a lot of dead and dying trees. So they've done their best they can and have defenses as much as 5 kilometers out from the town. But even with the best defense, something like a fire like that is going to have a difficult time managing it. So I agree with the mayor that there is some silver lining here. They managed to protect critical infrastructure in the schools. This means that people will come back to town. There will be industry, there will be economy there that gives an opportunity to rebuild and rebuild better. When
you think about the future and that concept of rebuilding, is the fact that there was a fire that took down huge swaths of the area in this near this town leading up to it, does that help with future fire prevention efforts? Like if you think about those prescribed burns as being something that is done to be preventative, does something like this, actually give them a bit of a leg up in the future? Or, I don't know, would it make them more vulnerable? What do you think?
Marginally so. There's still a lot of fuel in and around Jasper that could lead to more fires. I mean, there are parts of the town that are on the outskirts of the town that are still burning today. It's not that the fuel was eaten up. It's more the long-term lessons that Jasper has learned as a result of this. The fact that they're now deploying these large sprinklers. I mean, this was, I heard a few reports that where the sprinklers were out, it did lead to a lot of defense once the fire had crossed the wildland in urban face and was at the town site. So it's more the lessons learned. And one lesson that I'm really hoping to see out of Jasper is how to do a recovery well. One of the characteristics of the fires that we've been seeing over the last few years is they're very difficult to stop. They're very difficult to prevent from getting into urban areas when they're in that location. So we really do need to be thinking about how can we support rapid recovery? What are the lessons we can be deploying elsewhere? Because this will happen again.
And what does building back better look like, Jason? You mentioned that. Is that even about, how they're planting trees as well? The sort of making sure that nothing is too tight together. Is that part of the strategy of building back when you think about an area like Jasper?
Yeah, that's actually is a part of it, right? So yes, conifers create more risk for wildfire. When those things get on fire, each of the needles becomes its own little ember, whereas with the deciduous trees, there's less fuel. So that vegetation is a part of it. And because we do have a lot of expertise in that, it's also seeing some of the distances, gaps in the roads between areas where there was exposure between buildings. It's learning about how new buildings that are going to go up with better defenses, new materials, and overall, more of a commitment to probably extend the boundary of those fire defenses from where they are now to further into the forest. Some experts say that in places like Banff, for instance, and other areas where we have a lot of dry fuel combined with these very hot temperatures, we need to move out in concentric circles as much as 10 to 15 kilometers, cutting little towns of forest, actually. So that there's consistent wildfire breaks between them. That's resource intensive and will take a lot of time, but you can certainly see a plan materializing like that for Jasper.
Jason, really appreciate your insights on this today. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
That was Jason Thistlewaite. He's a professor at the University of Waterloo. For more, let's bring in our science and climate specialist, Darius Mahdavi. So, Darius, let's start with an overview here. What is the forecast looking like for BC and for Alberta this week?
There are a few things that we're going to be watching for, but the main thing is that we have a ridge of high pressure that's going to be building back in over Western Canada, which means we're not expecting to see too much relief in terms of these fires for much longer. Now, we've had some cooler, wetter conditions, as we heard, but it's not going to last too long. As we get into the end of this week, temperatures are expected to rise and we're expected to see some drier conditions. Now, if you take a look here, you can watch that ridge of high pressure build back in. First, just take a look at all the fires that we still have across both BC and Alberta. You can see a lot of those fires burning right here, a lot of those hot spots. But if we take a look at where we can see that ridge of high pressure building in, you'll notice that by the end of this week, that low pressure system that we've had over much of the province and over Western Canada starts to dissipate and be replaced by this ridge. Now that means hot conditions and dry conditions are on the way. And as we see that low pressure system move off, we may see some winds pick up as well. You can see that here in some places, especially in northeastern BC and northwestern Alberta, winds could easily exceed 50 kilometers per hour in terms of those gusts that we could see. So expect the possibility of some elevated fire activity here as well as at times in parts of southeastern Alberta. So those are two places we'll be watching. Now, a little bit of good news. There has been some good precipitation in parts of southern BC. Some more of that is expected for parts of the interior. But one of the places that we're really watching for, the southeastern corner of BC, has not really had the same relief as much of the province. So that's something we're a little bit concerned about, as fire danger has fallen across the rest of BC and much of Alberta. We haven't seen that same relief there. And then in terms of those temperatures, of course, that's another thing we'll be watching, really climbing as we get into the end of this week across Western Canada. So those are the main things that we'll be watching for.
Okay, so what are some of the hot spots in particular that you will be watching, Darius?
I think one of the big ones is Jasper. Of course, we've heard a lot about it. We've seen a lot of those terrible images that have come out because of all those structures that were lost. Now, in the press conference earlier today, we did hear that the officials are a little bit relieved about only is a relative term, a third of structures being lost, and they chalk that up to a lot of the prevention efforts that have happened over the past few years. But we are still in a bit of a precarious situation, especially as temperatures continue to rise into the end of this week. If you take a look here, you can see where we still have those fires burning in Jasper, both north and south of the town. So as temperatures rise and wildfire conditions worsen once again, we could see some elevated fire activity, but so far the threat level is much, much lower than it was last week. I also want to point out the southeastern corner of BC, where we also have many fires burning, especially the Slocan Lake complex, where we have 6 individual wildfires burning, hundreds of people evacuated from this area as a result. And again, not seeing as much relief in this southeastern corner of BC as some other areas. So another spot that we're going to be watching quite closely in the days ahead.
Okay, Darius, thank you. That's science and climate specialist Darius Mahdavi in Vancouver.